Hello, good evening. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties there, but hopefully you're still with us. Welcome to day 4 of Precious.Collective Online Jewellery Week. I have no idea how much you have missed or if you've seen anything at all, so I'm just going to repeat myself and get you all up to speed. So today is the narrative exhibition of the jewellery event, and I'm one of the co-curators, Katie Gillam-Hull. I've had such an amazing time working with these artists, so I'm just going to move quickly on to the video that they have made and share with you all of the insights into their practice. I'll be back at the end to say goodbye though. So let me share this video with you, and I really hope you enjoy it and that this works.
Hi, I'm Magnusou. I'm from Barcelona, and I am an architect and contemporary jeweler. My work consists of both metal pieces with the traditional techniques of the jeweler's craft and pieces in non-conventional materials. I am mainly interested in artistic jewelry, in pieces with a conceptual charge, with a discourse behind them. I love objects with a poetic character, objects that are like wearable metaphors. And all these discourses, these narratives, come from different sources of inspiration. They can appear as a response to a personal concern that haunts me, or maybe to a current social event that surrounds me, or to any other field. And they end up generating jewels. However, is it true that the theme of space, volume, and scale has always been present in my work? I love working on art projects that have a theme, a topic behind them. Because if I have parameters that limit the development of the piece, I feel more comfortable. If I am faced with a totally free proposal, I often feel lost, and I need to impose rules or conditionals on myself that makes me follow a common thread, a kind of guidelines. About the materials, the truth is that I love working with metal, mainly silver. And even though I'm not a virtuoso of the technique, I really like working with metal, with fire. But at the same time, I also enjoy working with other type of materials. I don't know, with ceramics, with paper, textiles, and with non-conventional materials. In fact, the choice of materials is usually linked to what I want to transmit with my work, with my piece. Often, in order to explain a certain concept, I look for a material that has properties or characteristics that highlight the discourse, the concept. And about the process, depending on the proposal I'm working on, the process changes. Well, rather, the technical process can change absolutely, but the creative process is always quite similar. I start by introducing myself fully into the project through brainstorming. I write a lot. I write ideas, concepts, references, and at the same time, simultaneously, I make sketches, I make drawings, fast drawings, with the first forms of the objects with very rough approximations. And later, even if I don't have a clear idea of what the final object will be like, I need to start working with the materials to see how they respond, to see if they resemble the volumes I have in mind. And the truth is that often the result is absolutely a surprise, a discovery I had not foreseen. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Anna Zeibig. I was previously an interior designer living in Budapest, Hungary. Previously, I lived long years in Spain, and now I'm a trained jeweler. I work mostly with silver, textiles, and porcelain, and I'm mostly inspired by literature and nature. Developing a project for me starts usually with drawings and sketching. That's the way I used to think. Then I start to play with different materials and I make sample models. Then I observe the models and I realize details I do like and others I don't like. So I continue working in this rather intuitive way. A project can take from 5 days to 2 months, depending a lot on the complexity and the materials I use. For example, working with porcelain is a very slow process. This is my working bench, and this is the other one I have in a co-working workshop. And I will show you some examples of my work. This one is the Pebble series. I worked here with the textiles, and this is a sample I used to form the textile, hammered the silver, and then I oxidized the silver. This will be a brooch, so I did the back of the brooch, and in this project the jewel was about transparencies, and that's why the title is Pebbles. So the item inside the textile is we can see it through the textile. The next project is the Journey series, and this one was made with porcelain. And at the beginning I used resin as a model to create the molds. I used them as a negative piece. So I did the plaster molds and I fill it with liquid porcelain, and then I created all the small items one by one, and after that I created the clasps. And this is the already fired porcelain, and the necklaces I made entirely with porcelain. The project I'm showing was made in a workshop with Liana Patis during the Athens Jewelry Week. The main inspiration was a picture of an ancient ruin. I started to search for a story, connections in literature, and I just remember that one of my favorite writers, Jorge Luis Borges, has wrote a short novel titled The Circular Ruins. I was always absorbed by the imaginary world of Borges, so I read again the story. It's a haunting tale about a stranger who arrives to the ancient circular ruins of the god of fire. He fell asleep there and begins to dream about creating himself. The man realizes that he does not really exist, he is only a dream. After finding connections in literature, I was looking for a song that could have a connection with the images and the story. A song from That Can Dance was the one I felt as an instrumental interpretation of this tale, and I was listening it a lot during the making process. Usually my choice of materials are based on the story behind the piece. For example, when I was inspired by this ancient ruin, I used stone, silver, bone, leather, and kaolin clay.
Hi, I'm Katherine Large. I live and work in Brisbane, Australia. I'm a silversmith and a jeweller, and I work with predominantly silver and enamel. However, I'm also very interested in using found objects and objects gleaned from walks, both urban and in the bush, where I have a complete fascination with rusty metal. I've always collected rusty metal, and this has been the predominant material I've used in the last year or two to create a series of work called Unintended Consequences. The pendant that I submitted for Precious.Collective is part of that series. The metal I've used is actually from a car wreck up on Mount Cootha, which is a mountain in the inner west of Brisbane. It's bushland, and there's a lot of car wrecks on the mountain. There's actually maps of where the car wrecks exist. This particular one dates from 1973. I've identified it as a Toyota Corolla, and it's literally just disintegrating into the ground. And I love just collecting small bits of rusty metal that have fallen to the ground. Sometimes I've cut them, sometimes I leave them in their natural state. For something like this pendant, I do very little prep to the metal, and I use WG ball enamels for steel. I like the fact that the metal is a forceful part of the work, and it pushes its way out. It makes its presence felt. It causes the enamel to be pitted and have holes in it and to respond in an unexpected way. So has been my approach with this. I allow the whole process to take me where it wants to go. Once I've finished the enamelling process, I've created a very simple sterling silver frame which has been oxidized, and I've added a chain to it. In terms of my materials, I have always been drawn to sterling silver. I love working with silver. It's a really responsive metal. I love making objects. I love raising and jewellery. But silver would be the metal that I'm most comfortable using. Sometimes with my work, it can take a long time for an idea to percolate to the surface. So I collect things. I have things all over my bench, and it can be some years before it becomes obvious what I'm going to do with something. Things can wait a long time before their voice is heard in my practice. And I don't mind that. I like living amongst all this stuff, and which can be a problem because my space is so small. But I often handle it and I think about it. So a lot of my process is just sitting with something rather than doing a lot of sketches and research. And then it becomes obvious what I need to do to it.
Hi, my name is Jamie Kruger. I live in Golden, British Columbia, Canada, which is situated on the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, and Okanagan people. I make narrative-based jewelry that is based on the relationship that humans have with nature and their time spent within it. My artwork used to fall more on the literal side of storytelling, but quite recently I've decided that as stories evolve, they tend to lose their specifics. So perhaps my work can be a venue for that idea as well. I don't necessarily have to have the viewer fully understand the story I'm telling, but my main hope is that within the object that's created, there's maybe a glimpse into this narrative that I'm portraying, whether it's about a horse trip that I was on or skiing a line in the backcountry. And perhaps when people see these objects, they are maybe reminded of a time that they've spent outside and how they connected to the landscape around them as well. I tend to work with a huge range of materials, and they're often chosen very specifically to help portray this story that I'm working on. And that goes along with process as well. So the way that I work with the material will often act as a metaphor for something that happened within the story. An example that I can think of that would pertain to this is a collection of work that involved depicting this job that I had with within the avalanche safety team, where we would go out and dig snow profiles and then relay that information to the avalanche forecasters. And within those snow profiles, there was a high level of intricacy and we were looking for specific crystals and different layers and how they interacted with each other. So the material I chose for that was to sew small glass beads onto felt forms, and the dedication and the preciseness and sort of the meditativeness of the process and working with that material, I felt was a way that I could translate this act of pulling crystals out of a 3-meter deep snowpack and the time that it takes to analyze it all. In my work, you'll find material, everything from wood to enamel, paint to show different patinas and wear over time, glass beads, textiles. It all really depends on what the story I'm working with, and the mood that I'm in, whether I want to hammer metal, something that's a little more aggressive, or whether I want to sit quietly and work with textiles. I never used to think that my development process was all that regimented until just recently, and having to spend a lot of time inside during COVID or the initial stages of the pandemic. But what I've come to realize is that my work starts by being outside or being in different situations and creating these stories. And without the stories, I have trouble making jewelry about them. And then often, for whatever reason, I can't even get started on the actual making of the object until I have a title for it, which seems a bit backwards, but there's a bit of a roadblock until I figure out what this collection is going to be called. And then at that point, I just start playing with different materials and deciding which one is going to work best to portray different elements of the story or the things that I see within the event. And eventually I'll do I'll make a bunch of samples and drawings and paintings, and then from there the actual object sort of grows out of that.
Hi, I'm Katya. I'm originally from Germany, but now live in Washington, D.C. in the United States. I make jewelry here that typically is made from small series from a number of different, typically white materials. I tend to take a long time in trying to find the ideas and concepts that I'm trying to talk about in my work. As I said before, I work in small series. So once I have a theme that I want to develop further, I typically tend to make somewhere between 10 and 20 pieces that kind of fits that particular theme. The pieces in the current exhibition for Precious.Collective were made from a small flask, a small glass flask that is used by, the old-fashioned apothecaries and pharmacists, of which I have a whole collection. This flask interested me for that very narrative about, what substances it might have held at some point, how was it used, and what ailments may have been treated using those substances. So I felt like it was a good object to convey a certain story or an exploration of a story, perhaps. The thoughts that I have while making the work in a series, I don't expect anybody else to have similar thoughts even, but I do believe that using certain objects that are recognizable will direct people who come across my work in a certain direction, or maybe a way of thinking, and typically I would expect them to arrive at their own interpretations of what they're looking at. I am a huge material explorer and tend to make a whole bunch of samples of the materials that I'm intending to work with. Of course, I have a few go-tos and favorites. For instance, ground up eggshell powder is one of them. But I will always explore how I might suspend it in different formulas. And I would say that I would typically have way more failures than successes, but the successes are then the ones that make it into the final pieces. I tend to like certain materials. Recently, I've become more aware or concerned with environmental issues, so I've started to shy away from products such as epoxy, or if I do use them, I've researched materials that are less toxic or bad for the environment. So as you might gather already, this is a slow process, and I tend to have work for a new series percolate while I still finish making the pieces from a previous series. So a new direction is already kind of cooking up in the back of my mind. And then I take, I get really impatient and excited when it comes to figuring out how to actually make the pieces and how to make more samples, how to explore new techniques perhaps that I want to use in a new series. So I would say it easily takes months, and the making of the actual pieces, they're typically already fully formed in my head before I even get to my workbench. And so I tend to make them, I would say, relatively quickly, maybe. I mean, I'm not saying months, but maybe days. And they're all one-of-a-kind pieces, so then nothing gets made in a very short time. I don't really, I'm not that interested in work that is made quickly so that I can leave my environment quickly. I tend to take a long time to make my pieces and to think about my pieces and what they might mean in the world.
When it comes to the ideas and narratives behind my work, I gather them in several different ways. Sometimes that's by doing a lot of historical research, finding some kind of hidden real-life stories from history and sharing them and telling them through an object, in which case I like it to be quite clear, that narrative. I like to really spell it out for the viewer so they can enter into that narrative and that world. Other times, though, I gather those ideas from the objects themselves by working with found materials. The joy of that is that the found objects themselves, we have to make up their story sometimes, and it's a bit more imaginative, and I can leave that open to the viewer. In particular, the piece that I am displaying with this festival, my collecting brooch, really places more control in the wearer and the viewer, because it allows people to collect objects and papers and things they find throughout their day and display them in their brooch. So that really puts all of the control into the hands of the wearer, and in a way they get to direct the narrative, because what they choose ends up telling a different story, a story about them, almost a portrait of the wearer. And when I look into choosing my materials, I quite like my materials and my concept to really connect and really feel very seamless and very cohesive. And so sometimes that means using precious metals, sometimes that's very traditional aesthetics and techniques, specifically if I want to make something very antique looking, almost like an artifact. I want to use that imagery and those connotations of precious metals. But quite often it's working with found objects again. It's working with the inbuilt history, with the connotations of something old and decayed and a little mysterious. And I gather my found objects in lots of different ways, and mostly through mudlarking. And mudlarking, if you haven't heard of it, is a process of going down onto the banks of the River Thames in London when the tide is low, and sort of going through the mud and seeing what you can find. The joy of that is that there is a lot of history in London, and you can find objects from hundreds upon hundreds of years ago. When it comes to developing my work from first idea to final object, it can often take years. I don't always mean it to, but I have lots of ideas and not all of them work. And you'll often find yourself picking up something, a mistake or an offcut, and finding years later that actually that's a great idea and I want to use that. I've actually had whole jewellery collections just come from offcuts. My best ideas are from mistakes sometimes. And some of my favourite projects have been 7 years in the making, always thinking about it without realising, and all of a sudden it clicks. And all those ideas make sense. In particular, the collecting brooch for this festival I've been kind of not working on it for 7 years, but I first made it 7 years ago, and I've always been thinking around this topic. I've always been interested in finding and collecting objects for my own work. So this original idea was just a necklace that facilitated collecting, that encouraged people to do it. And whereas now I'm looking at how to analyse the way we collect, how we make those choices, what we think is worth collecting, what that says about the person and the finder. And so this new piece of jewellery is a kind of throwback to that original piece, but feels a lot more in depth and a lot more advanced. And what I love now is that the wearer can put it on and we can start to see almost a portrait of that person by seeing what they put in, what they deem precious and valuable and worth displaying in their jewellery.
Hi, I'm Monique from Buenos Aires, Argentina. My education comes from visual arts. I specialized in painting, but nowadays jewelry is my main language. One is in relation to the materials that I use. I always start from the object that I find. And the other is in relation to the theme. My works are a reflection about rethinking the feminine. I choose materials that help me to tell my story in the best way possible. My process of work is slow. Before I begin to work, I read and I think for a long time. I look for inspiring and triggering words. I surround myself with the elements that are going to be part of the piece. First, I choose and decide, and then I start to work. I almost never do previous sketches.
Hi, I'm Namgyang Lee. I'm from Seoul, South Korea, and I'm expressing the concept of memory and space as jewelry through the medium of photography. My work begins with photographic images that are closely related to memory. I use photos of places I have captured during my past travels or in my daily life, which served as a metaphorical medium for the abstract images of memory. The memory image I use is eventually connected to a place, and it's accompanied by the concept of space. Through these two words, memory and space, I try to connect various stories in my jewelry. I use photorealistic images in my work, but I try to express abstract images of ambiguous memories through them. I tend not to describe a clear narrative directly inside or outside of my work. Although it's an image of a specific place and related to my personal memory, I am interested in seeing my work create their own stories and empathize with them. Windows play a significant role in my work. Perhaps this is because of the attractive part their frames play inside and outside of a space. To express a transparent image of window, I use the technique of printing photos on a transparent acrylic board. And to show the disorder and distortion of memory, layering different place images and visualizing them as a new abstract image. The element of the frame is used as both a three-dimensional form and a planar image. It served as a medium which expressed the interaction between place and memory. The partially used decorative frame symbolized the element of architecture. It's also an element that expressed the distortion of space. For these frames, I use 3D programs to create my own decorative elements inspired by the decoration of buildings, window frames, and objects captured inside or outside the space with windows, then cast them and reconstruct them in various forms. The concept of space is a starting point in my work process. It can be said that images and frames are used to create this as a medium called jewelry. It's difficult to estimate the cycle time required for one piece as it goes through such a work process. The process of finding an image, editing it, printing it, enclosing the image with metal frame, and structuring the overall shape with the image and various elements. Each step can take hours or even days.
Hi, I'm Raquel. I live in Mexico City. I have a home studio where I combine my work with textiles and metal. The themes I address in my work have strong references to my surroundings, daily things I see or experience. It is strongly related to a quotidian narrative, which I don't mind explaining. However, I prefer to give some space for interpretation first. The pieces Windows Paris are part of a series of work in which I take inspiration from photographs shared with me during the last year. These images made me feel I could travel through their eyes, awakening in me the sense of immediacy in which an image can reach from one side of the world to another, embarking us in a kind of elusive travel. I've been working with metals for 20 years now, and I love the possibilities it brings. Still, I began to incorporate textile and embroidery into my work for quite some time now, as I generally feel drawn to them and the unique way texture and color can speak for themselves. My choice of materials is generally intuitive, but I make sketches and tryouts. I fill my sketchbooks with pencil drawings and watercolors and refer to them for inspiration, taking only subtle references. For this series, though, I applied these studies straight onto fabric, experimenting with watercolor on fabric techniques. My process always begins when I find the story I want to tell. Daily walks inspire me. Looking through sketchbooks or photos, developing a concept or theme first sometimes allows me to be open to small happenings that can give me a starting point. Usually, I first work on the fabric and painting to then visualize it as a jewelry piece. It would be difficult to tell how long it takes me to work on a piece from start to finish, as I work in several simultaneously. Often, while working on one, I get the idea for the next. Of course, being open for some not working is part of the story and process. So when I finish the piece, I hope to feel it reflects every decision I took and I can learn from it for the next one.
Hi again. Thank you so much for joining us. As you can see, now you've watched that video, why I'm so excited to have been able to work with all these artists, and I've been so honoured to be able to share my work alongside them as well. They're absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you already know that you can find out more about their work on our website for the Collective Online Jewellery Week, and the link to that is in the description box down below, so feel free to explore, find out more on there. We've also got events going on our Instagram, so today throughout the Instagram page we have had a selection of our artists from Narrative doing an international artist interview where they've been sending each other questions. So today that link of pass on a question has been going from Seoul, South Korea, to all the way to Washington DC across all the time zones, and it's been lovely to get a chance to ask each other a little bit more and to discover a little more. So I really recommend you check that out on the Precious Collective Instagram page. Also, if you've been enjoying this event, it's all free, but we are taking donations for an amazing charity that we're partnering with. And that's headed up by Lucy Spink. It's called Makers Against Extinction. And again, the link is in the bio for that. So if you really enjoy the event and want to support us, please donate instead. And that'd be fantastic. Thank you again. You've all been fantastic. And enjoy your evening. Bye.